Alright, it's time for the solutions for the factoring quadratics when a is 1. That means basically on all these, if you look at the leading coefficient there, they're all 1, as in there's no number in front. And that actually makes it quite nice in trying to factor these, because what you need to do is you go to the last number, and you need to think of the factors that would multiply to give you this, and if you were to add them, give you this coefficient. So 90, you can make that with 9 and 10. Well, if you add those, you'd get 19, which is actually the coefficient for there. So that's what we're going to do. You're going to put x at the beginning of your two binomials. Let me write out two binomials real quick. And then just make one 9, the other one 10, and you're good to go. If you multiply them, you get 90. If you add them together, you'll get 19, and that one's good to go. Moving on to number 2. Again, start with your binomials, x plus something, and then x plus something else. And when you think of two numbers that multiply to give you 32, the only two I can think of that are 8 and 4, 8 times 4, or 16 times 2. Well, 8 and 4, if they were both negative, would add up to give you negative 12. And so, here, let's just erase some of these pluses here. If you do negative 8 and negative 4, those will times to give you positive 32 and add to give you negative 12. So that one's all done. Moving on to the next one, start out with, here I won't do x plus, I'll just do x in front. Okay, and now this one we have a situation where there's a negative. That means two numbers have to multiply together to give you this negative. So one's going to be positive, the other one's going to be negative. And then those two factors are going to have to add to give you 6. Well, 27, to get 27 you can do 9 times 3. And those are the only two factors I can think of aside from 27 and 1. But if you take positive 9 and negative 3, those will multiply to give you 27. And if you were to add those together, you would get 6, because 9 plus negative 3 is positive 6. And that one's done. Moving on to the next one. We have x and x. Again, we have a negative here on the end, so one of these is going to have to be negative, the other one's going to have to be positive. And now when you think of factors of negative 40, that when you add them will give you positive 6. Well, 4 and 10, if you had a positive 10 and a negative 4, would give you positive 6 if you were to add those together. So positive 10, negative 4. And those are the two factors, and now we've factored it out. Let's see this next one. Oh man, this doesn't even have a... Here, let me change the variable quick. That should be p's, because that's the variable in the problem. Moving on to the next one, we have some b's here, and our two binomials. All this is positive, so my two factors are going to be positive. And the factors that you can multiply together to get 8 are 2 and 4. And that's all I can think of except 8 and 1. And, well, 2 and 4, if you add them together, gives you 6. So that's going to be good. 2 and 4 add together give you 6. Moving on to the next one. This one has n's in it, but we're still going to have two binomials. They're going to have to multiply to give you positive 5, but add to give you negative 6. And so both of these are going to be negative, because negative times negative gives you the positive 5. And the only factors of 5 I can think of are 5 and 1. Well, luckily, if you have negative 5 and negative 1 and you add them together, you get negative 6. And so those are going to be our two factors. There. Ta-da! Moving on. Number 7. Both of our binomials are going to start with n, because that's the variable in question. All the terms are positive here, so we're going to have some positive additions to these binomials. And you think of two numbers that multiply together to give you 35 and add to give you 12. Well, 7 and 5 multiply together to give you 35. And if you add those together, you get 12. So there you go. There's that one. Moving on to the next guy. These ones got v's in it. And we have a negative as our last term here. So one of these is going to have to be positive. The other one's going to be negative. And when you think of two factors of negative 40, when you add them, will give you negative 3. Well, 40 can be made with 4 and 10. And you can do 5 and 8. Well, 4 and 10 aren't going to give you negative 3, but 5 and 8 can. if you had a negative 8 and a positive 5, if you add those together, you get negative 3. So there we go, there's that one. Moving on to 9, these ones are going to have B's in them. And then you think of 2 things that multiply together give you negative 36. Well, that means one of these has to be positive, the other one has to be negative. And to get 36, you can do 3 times 12. You can do 6 times 6. You can do, let's see, hold on, 6 times 6, 3 times 12, 4, and 9. You just gotta cycle through all these 2 things you can multiply together and figure out which of these are gonna add to give you positive 5. One's gonna be negative, the other one's gonna be positive. Well, 4 and 9 have a difference of 5. Whoops, 4 is gonna be over here. And so that's gonna be it. 4 times negative 4 times 9 gives you negative 36, and positive 9 and negative 4 add to give you positive 5. And that one's good to go. Moving on to 10, we're going to have n's in front of our binomials here. The second guy is, the last term is negative, so one of these is going to be positive, the other one's going to be negative. And when you think of 2 factors, when you add them together, are going to give you negative 6 out of, well, factors of negative 27. 27 is 3 times 9, or if you did negative 9 and positive 3, those would multiply to give you negative 27. And since the 9 is negative, when you add 3 to that, you'll get less negative, which would be negative 6. Moving on to the next one, we have some x's in these binomials. So x is out front. Again, the negative for our last term there, so one's going to be positive, the other one's going to be negative. When you think of things that when you multiply together give you negative 20, and when you add, you get negative 8. Well, 20 can be made from 5 times 4 and 2 times 10, and that one actually works out. So if we had a negative 10 and a positive 2, and you add those together, you'd get negative 8, which is my other coefficient there, and so that one's done. Next one, these are going to have n's in them, and again, our last term here is negative, so one of these is going to be negative, the other one's going to be positive, because that's the only way you're going to multiply 2 things together to get a negative. And now when you think of factors of 45 that add up to, well, negative 45 that add up to be negative 4. 45 can be made with 5 times 9, and that's the only thing aside from 45 and 1 that I can think of off the top of my head. 15 and 3, but those aren't going to get us to it. Because right here we have negative 4. Well, you can get that from negative 9 and positive 5 being added together. And so there's that. Moving on to 13 and 14, we'll have some, on 13 we have 2 pairs of n binomials. All the terms are positive, so these are both going to be positive. And when you think of 2 numbers, when you multiply together, give you 40, and when you add, you get 13. Let's see, I got 2 and 20, multiply to give you 40. Or you can do 8 and 5. Well, only 8 and 5 add together to give you 13. And so that one's squared away. Moving on to the next guy, we have m in both of these. And we're going to have, since this is a negative here, we're going to have a positive and a negative. And something to notice, there's no middle term in the middle. There's no term in the middle that has an m. And that means when you add our 2 factors together, they're going to equal 0. Well, that's really easy to do. If one's positive and the other one's negative, you just make it the same number. So think of 64, and what's the square root of 64? Well, that's 8 and 8. If you add positive 8 and negative 8 together, you're going to get 0. And so that's why there's not going to be a middle term here in the middle, but you are going to have 2 binomials. Let's do 15 and 16. X is going to be in both of these. Since this guy is negative, one of the factors is going to be positive, the other one's going to be negative. And think of things that multiply together to give you 8. That's 4 and 2, or 8 and 1. Well, if you had a bigger 4 than a 2, you could have negative 4 and a positive 2. If you add those together, you get negative 2, so that gives us the middle term of the original thing there. The original quadratic. The next one has x's, again, a negative in the third term, so one is going to be positive, the other one's going to be negative. And you think of factors of 30 that when you times together give you negative 30 and add to give you positive 1. things I can think of are 3 and 10, and then 5 and 6, and that one's actually good, because 5 and 6 have a difference of 1. So if you have positive 6 and negative 5, you add those together, you're going to get just 1, which will be the factor there. And that'll be the first video.